will know the word Eucharist, which literally means giving thanks or a blessing, is also a word that historically has been used to describe the sacrament of communion, right? The Eucharist, the Holy Eucharist, we sometimes call it in the church. The sacrament of communion, in which what happens? We bring ordinary gifts, bread, and once upon a time, I guess, wine, and now grape juice or holy grape juice or something. But we bring very ordinary things, and then they're given thanks for. They're blessed at the table and then redistributed to the people. And we say that when they are redistributed, they are no longer just bread and juice, but they are the body and blood of Christ. Ordinary things from ordinary people become, in some mysterious way, holy things for holy people. Or, as I heard it described to me, ordinary things become instruments of blessing, and ordinary people become children of God. And this, my friends, in my mind, is miraculous. Ordinary things, ordinary people, people like you and me, with all our failings, all our flaws, so ordinary, nonetheless become, by the grace of God, children of God and instruments of divine blessing. I don't know about you, but when I look at myself, and I know, as the psalm says, my goings in and my comings out, and I know my risings up and my fallings down, and when I think that God has asked me to be an instrument of blessing for others, even me, well, then I say, that's miraculous. Perhaps you've known people, ordinary people, who have been instruments of blessing for you. I have. I want to tell you this morning about my grandmother. Her name was Marion Smith. She was born in 1909 in a little town in Kansas. And she, as a young woman, thought often about becoming a missionary. It was a very common wish of women of her generation. That generation sent thousands and thousands of women missionaries all over the world. One day my grandmother woke up. She was a teenager and decided that she could be a missionary right there at home. And that's what she did with her life. She lived in the same town in El Dorado, Kansas, married a man, my grandfather, and she lived almost 75 years in the same house. And she lived an utterly ordinary life that was utterly extraordinary, as far as I can tell. She was devoted to her family, to her church, to her community, to her neighbor. She worked for decades as a parish visitor on her church's staff, going to visit the sick and the shut-in and the hospitalized. She was a communion steward at her church as well, helping to serve the sacraments, which she loved so greatly. One of the great privileges of my life was getting to serve my grandmother communion the last time I saw her before she died. My childhood memories are utterly dominated by my memories of my trips to my grandmother's house in El Dorado, Kansas. My family lived in Kansas City until the age of 8, and we'd spend weekends at my grandmother's house. My brother and sisters and cousins and I would gather there. There were 7 of us, and I remember so many things about my grandmother's house, some of them peculiar. I remember in the middle of the living room floor there was a metal grate over the burning furnace in the basement. Any of you remember houses like that? And I remember riding around in the back of my grandfather's pickup truck. He'd drive us downtown, all 7 of us, little children, in the back of a pickup truck to go get ice cream. And I remember playing out in the open alley that ran out behind their house, completely unobstructed by fences or guard rails or speed bumps or anything. I think, my God, there's a part of me that thinks how irresponsible of my parents, now that I have small children, right? I think, how could they allow us to do these things, which today we would consider enormously dangerous for small children? And yet the irony is that for me, my grandmother's house, well, it represents for me a place of supreme security. It seems that way because of my grandmother, you see, whose serene demeanor and soft voice could calm any childhood fear. I remember at the end of the day at my grandmother's house, and the 7 of us cousins would line up in the living room, and the parents would stay in the kitchen, sitting up late and talking, drinking coffee. And then my grandmother would come in to the living room, and she'd come in, and kneeling down beside us, she'd rub our backs and run her fingers through our hair and whisper to us sweet nothings, putting us to sleep one by one. I left the church as a teenager. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then in my 20s, I came back to it. And sometimes people will ask me, well, why did you come back to the church? Why did you come back to be a Christian again? and it sounds supremely naive, but the honest answer to that question is because my grandmother used to rub my back. And I tell people that I know because my grandmother used to rub my back and run her fingers through my hair. I know that my life has been touched by the hand of God. Maybe you've known someone like that too. Someone entirely ordinary who has been nonetheless an instrument of great blessing for you. Isn't it extraordinary? Isn't it miraculous? Well, Jesus was trying to teach his disciples something that day. They didn't get it, of course. They never do. One preacher I heard said the best image to have of Jesus, as you read the Gospels, the best image to have of Jesus is of Jesus going like this and rolling his eyes. Because again and again, he tries to teach the disciples something, and they don't get it. In this case, they don't get it because they think they've just found their meal ticket, right? This guy can turn fishes and loaves into food for 5,000. And they also think they found the new king of Israel, the Messiah, right? That's what all these Jews for centuries had been hoping for, that the Messiah, an anointed one, a king, would come to sit on the throne in Jerusalem. And wasn't that where Jesus was headed? Well, the next verses in the story suggest that this is precisely what they thought. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. The people were going to take Jesus by force, it says. They wanted to grab on and get hold of this guy because he was capable of these astonishing things. They wanted to control him, didn't they? They wanted to put Jesus in a box of their own understanding. They wanted him to go sit on the throne in Jerusalem and to get rid of the Romans who were occupying their holy land. Jesus had a different idea in mind, though, didn't he? Jesus understood, you see, that his calling was not to the throne, but his calling was to the cross. And so he withdrew to clarify his own mission, to clarify his own understanding, and then to set out on the trek for Jerusalem again. It's not an either-or problem, it turns out, this mystery of God's grace. It's not that God will fix it. All our problems will suddenly be washed away. And it's not that it all depends on us. It's a give and take in which we, when we are honest with ourselves, try to follow Jesus who calls to us. And when we do so, we do it right when we allow Jesus to be Jesus and we allow God to be God. Will Willimon says that a common question for Christians to ask is, what will you do for us, God? God as an ATM machine, yes? What will you do for us? And Willimon says, no, that's the wrong question. The right questions are these. Who are you, God? Who are you, Jesus? What is your mission? And then how can we join in? I read a wonderful little book a couple of years ago, and it sticks with me.